But they had a sort of few little mottos. So I was definitely into Julie Andrews, you might remember, you know, The Hills Were Alive and that. And she always said, perseverance is failing 19 times and succeeding the 20th, within reason. And then my dad also had a phrase, reach for the stars and you just might skim the treetops. I know a few people talk about reaching the moon, and I'm like, no, 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 no. Actually, if you reach for the stars, you might just see the tops of the trees. And this was very much this sort of motto that I've taken with me. And so I desperately wanted to be a doctor. Don't know why. I thought my GP was great, but we had no medical career there was nothing in my family at all. And yeah, so I applied to Manchester University, got offered a place, flunked my A-levels. I got an E in physics. Yes. And here I am speaking at an engineering conference. I mean, it's amazing. It really is amazing. But in some ways, I did go back and redo my physics. I went from an E to an A, so I did well. But, you know, having done very well at school, I failed spectacularly. And I remember being told by my headmistress, you're never going to be a doctor, you're never going to get to university, your life is going to be just, you know, it's not going to happen. And I think at the time I thought, do you know what? I'm going to show you. I was really, really cross. And somebody asked Claire about how does it make you feel. I still feel as irritated and as cross as I did then, age 18. So I did retake my A-levels and I applied and I was interviewed by the Royal Free and by UCL and was rejected. I think it's quite funny here, standing here as a professor at UCL, that, yeah, turned me down. But in some ways, if I hadn't been turned down at that point, I probably wouldn't have ended up here at St Andrews, where I did go to medical school. And it was really in the 4th year I decided to intercalate, because I was sharing a flat with a biochemist in her 3rd year. And she came home, she used to talk all about her projects and all the lab work she was doing, and I found it absolutely fascinating. And she was extracting DNA and running gels and doing ELISAs and all this sort of thing. I was thinking, wow, this sounds really interesting, I want to do that. So in some ways, if I'd actually gone to university, UCL or Royal Free or Manchester, I probably wouldn't have I wouldn't have shared a flat with this person, I wouldn't have stayed on, I wouldn't have intercalated, and I wouldn't have gone, I love science. This was about gene therapy, and gene therapy is really simply about giving genetic material to cells to have an effect, and that's all you really need to know about it. And I was working on a project. It was funded by the Medical Research Council. It wasn't a research training fellowship, but it was a project trying to take what people were doing in mice into humans. And we were using sheep. So I did a lot of sheep surgeries, a lot of sheep experiments, and this was all about trying to treat the fetus before birth. We're going to try and treat genetic disease before birth. And it was amazing. The PhD worked really well. We did lots of ultrasound. We could find different techniques to deliver the therapy to the fetus. Great. But unfortunately, during the PhD, I realised that actually what I was going to try to do was not going to be ethically applicable in the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. It just wasn't going to happen. And this was because adult gene therapy had not really yet shown any evidence of efficacy. This was about 2004. So I got to the end of my PhD, oh, like, wonderful, we're going to deliver, we're going to save babies. And then thought, do you know what, nobody's actually done this in adults yet. So I had to realise that actually adult gene therapy had to work first, and then we had to work for neonatal gene therapy, and then we'll probably have to go down the route of giving stem cells to fetuses, and then stem cells and gene therapy before we ever got to the point of doing fetal gene therapy. So I was a bit like, got to the end of my PhD and thought, I can't actually do what I want to do, which I've been working on for the last 4 years, because it's just not ethical. We don't have enough data on it. And I thought, well, really, the better problem, the more prevalent problem, is this problem of fetal growth. And so I decided to work on this project, maternal gene therapy. And I remember going along to the first meeting, and it was a very sort of small meeting. I think small conferences where you're just talking, presenting your data to a really receptive audience. You're not going to get shot down in flames by some expert who says you're mad. I remember presenting my data saying, I want to give gene therapy to pregnant mums. And Nobody said, you're mad. They all said, you know, it just might work. And that was all that we needed. And so I decided to go down this route of thinking about delivering gene therapy to the mum to increase blood flow in the uterine artery. So this is improving the circulation of small babies, and this is the ultimate problem. So here we are, got a great idea, fantastic original idea. This all stemmed from £20,000 from my boss's slush fund from his private practice. We managed to demonstrate in 5 sheep that it worked and get a patent. That was great. So then we thought, right, we've just got to do a grant application. I've never written a grant application before. In fact, it was my boss at the time who wrote the grant application. And we wanted to do this long term. We wanted to see, are we going to be able to improve growth in sheep? We've got to do it in animals first. Are we going to be able to do this in sheep? So we wrote to MRC and it didn't work. Medical Research Council didn't like the idea. And they said, you really should be doing it long term, okay? So we decided to write a grant to the British Heart Foundation, writing, we're going to do it long term. You know, reviewers' comments, read the reviewers' comments, do what they ask. No, they didn't like the idea either. They said, you need to do it in a model of growth restriction. We were a bit like, okay, where do we get the money from? Well, at the time, some of the funding for gene therapy was coming from ARC Therapeutics, which was an industrial spin-out from Division of Medicine. And so they agreed to fund the first project, which was looking at long-term effect, and we demonstrated we haven't had an effect long-term. But the next thing we had to do was then show in a model of growth restriction whether it actually worked. So I wrote another lot of grant applications, and they were all rejected. By this time, I was the one writing the grant applications, and I got very good at writing grant applications. And it wasn't that the grant applications weren't badly written. I think it was just that this was such a novel idea that people didn't understand it. But also, I wasn't telling a very good story. I needed to go bigger. I needed to say, you know, this is about saving lives. This is about saving money, looking at the big vision for what we were doing. We did get some data. We got some funding from the Wellcome Trust, so that was my 5th grant application, okay? That paper was rejected 3 times. It went to the Lancet. We had 3 excellent reviews from the Lancet. I sent the abstract to the Lancet first of all and said, would you take this? This is the sheep study. We're talking about treating fetal growth restriction. They went, yes, we'll take it. It's really interesting. We would like to take science papers. And you're going to guess what happened? The reviewers thought it was great. The editor wrote back and said, it's too scientific for us. A bit like, okay. So then my PhD student got very dejected and said, right, well, where are we going to go next? So we sent it to another series of gene therapy journals who said, this is great, but no, we don't believe the data. There was quibbles with the data. So finally it got down to a journal and it was accepted. And this is the point. I think it's really important to realise that some of the people who review your paper may not know about what you're talking about. It's particularly a problem in obstetrics, women's health, is that there's not a lot of research that's done outside obstetrics. You can publish in obstetric journals, but if you try and put science into some obstetric journals, they don't want to take it. But if you try and take obstetrics or women's health into other journals, they don't want to take it because they don't understand the women's health aspect of it. So it's about having that vision. What is the long-term aim? You know, all this stuff of people going bust, not getting papers done, your PCR taking time, reprotox study not working. It's all fluff when it comes down to it. What are you aiming to do? You're aiming to develop a new treatment for a condition for which there is no treatment, and that's your vision. And I found really working, we had a patient group by this stage, working with the patient group, you know, when it comes down to it, this is life and death for them. And the fact that somebody is working on something means so much to them. Okay, somebody goes bust. You just have to go out there, sell your soul and find another person to do the job. And you will find people bend over backwards to ally with you. So at the very beginning of the project, when the industrial partner was liquidated, I had a wonderful project manager working with me. And I said, you know, I can't pay you as much money as I know it's going to cost because you charge consulting fees. He said, I don't care. I want to work on this project because I have personal experience of a baby in my family losing a pregnancy, and I think this project is fantastic. So allies come from all over, and it is very much worth thinking about what is your long-term aim, what is your vision, and a lot of the other stuff is just fluff. So yes, we've run out of the EC funding. I'm applying for more funding now, so we're at 2020. I thought we'd be finishing the trial in 2018. We haven't finished it yet, we haven't started yet. But we've learned an awful lot on the way about this particular condition, about how we're going to get it into patients, and about how it might work. And this was the vision. So this was something that I did at the very beginning of the project. And it's terribly useful to just do a bit of a brain dump about what is your vision, what are the different aspects of what you want to do. And this could be about getting work-life balance, it could be all the different aspects. And it just is a way of setting down what are the challenges. And you might find that some of this is not related to science, some of it might be related to sort of regulation, about ethics, but a lot of it, if you keep working on this, it will actually make your vision go forward. The other thing is, a couple of other things is, so you go back to that and you think, how on earth am I going to eat the elephant? That is just a huge list of stuff that needs to be done. Well, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So you tick off the things that you can do, the things you have got control over, and then plan about the things you don't have control over, that you can perhaps work with collaborators, work with other partners, work with patients. You nibble away at it. So it's really important to remember, you know, you're not going to eat the elephant in one great big gulp. You're going to do it one bite at a time. So important. The team are absolutely key here. And this is my team. My team is my husband. He's a management consultant. And he's really good at criticising my grants. Really good. And he'll look at a scope, but that's it, you know, he's a physicist. But he doesn't know anything about, you know, growth restriction, but he'll ask the obvious questions, the ones you've forgotten about, like, well, why is it important to treat this condition? Oh, I forgot to write down that it causes long-term cardiovascular disease and really expensive. And I think also as well, the team is other people in your life. This is my son, this is my daughter, and you've got to do things with them and outside. And it's really important to plan time with them, because otherwise it does become all-encompassing. These are the rest. My other team members are my consultant colleagues, my junior doctor colleagues, midwives, and as I said before, patients, the end users. These guys are fantastic because, you know, and there are some couples in here who have not got a baby. They come along to the patient group because they want to work with us. And setting up patients groups are not expensive. It's only probably about, you know, you need to buy them good biscuits, good coffee and tea, and generally you'll be able to get a patient group to come along, or a user group, whatever you're working on, a user group to find out, you know, the reality of what is it that you're doing. And then these are my other team, so UCL colleagues and great collaborations that I've had the pleasure of working with. So people like engineers that I never would have thought. If you told me when I was 18 you'll be working with engineers, I'd have gone, I won't know I don't know what language they'll speak, but you know, you work on it. So I use Skype a lot. I try and work from home 1 day a week. My diary looks like this, so we have about 5 or 6 electronic diaries that are all synced, so I know exactly what my other half is doing, what my family's doing, and I block out my diary 6 months in advance with days working at home, no meetings. That's a note for me not to put a meeting in there. I have a cleaning lady. She does all the ironing. She's bottle fed my kids, and if necessary, picked up the kids from school. We've worked with nannies, we've had childminders, we've done nurseries, we've done all sorts of mixtures. You just have to make it work. But I think it's really important to be flexible in your time. As a clinical academic, I probably have much more flexibility control than many of my full-time clinical colleagues. So for the clinicians out there, I do remember one of my full-time clinical colleagues used to leave home at 7 o'clock and be back home by 8 o'clock, 5 days a week. She never saw her kids when they were growing up. Whereas at least I was able to have some control. So yes, I do work weekends, I do work evenings, but that's my choice to be able to do that so that I can actually spend time with my kids who don't get out of bed till 11 o'clock in the morning now on the weekends, so I generally do some work in the morning rather than what I used to do work in the evening. I think this is really important, imposter syndrome. Everyone feels like an imposter sometimes, and that's okay. You know, when you sort of look back at what you've done and you think, well, was I really, you know, can I really do this? I remember coming back to work after I'd had my first baby, and I thought, you know what, there's no way I'm going to be able to do a cesarean section. I can't do that. How am I going to be able to juggle delivering that, you know, doing my clinical work and working in the lab and trying to get grant funding and trying to teach all at the same time? It's just going to be impossible. But actually, it is possible to do it. Other people are doing it, and you just have to think, well, I can do it. Why don't I give it a try? And the reality is, this is what you think when you have imposter syndrome. You think, I know very little, and what other people know is an awful lot. And I remember when I first started working with the engineering group, I was at a meeting with Seb Orsalan. We were applying for this healthcare engineering grant, and we got through the first stage, and there was a group full of engineers and healthcare people, medical physicists, and one of the reviewers' comments had come back and said, you need to think more about public engagement and patient outcomes. And I remember Seb saying, does anybody know about patient outcomes and public engagement and ethics? And I looked around and I thought, I'm sure there's somebody in the room who knows about this stuff. Nobody spoke. I thought, I know about this. And that was because I did know about it. I knew more about it than the other people in the group. But I didn't feel until that point that I belonged in that grant. But having done that, I now know that that is my contribution, to think about the impact and the ethics and the public engagement and the patient-reported outcomes of everything that healthcare engineers and medical physicists are delivering. So yes, you actually know a lot, and other people know more about other things. And if you work together as a team, then you will develop a vision for improving health, for improving patients, for improving life in general. I think it's really important to frame your thought process. So when we're talking in fetal medicine, we frame risk, and we do it in a good way and a bad way. So I'll present to patients and I'll say, you have a 1 in 10 risk of having a baby with Down syndrome, but on the other hand, you have a 9 out of 10 risk of having a baby with no Down syndrome. So it's really important to put both pictures in there, both views. So what happens if I fail? If you always think about what happens if you fail, you have to remember to think, I might even succeed. And you're not going to succeed unless you're actually in the game. So that means taking up opportunities to go along to give talks, volunteer to be on panels, go along to courses, go and network, go and talk to the person. You know, when you're at a meeting and you don't know anybody, go up to somebody and say, hello, I'm Anna David, nice to meet you. I'm interested to know what you work on. You never know, you're going to find a whole load of people that you might find something in common with, you might set up some great collaborations that way. So I think it's really important to think both sides. It's a balance. What happens if you might fail? Yes, but what happens if you succeed? It's really good to frame it in that way. And collaboration, I think, is so important, and these are the rules that I have about collaboration. I think it's important to have a central vision. Where are you as a collaboration going? Because there might be different thoughts about where it's going to go. Try and get some kind of central vision about what are you going to end up doing. Agree how you work together up front. That means who's going to be first author, who's going to be last author, where are the papers going to go, and who's going to provide the funding for what. And this is really difficult. I think it's very hard to do it up front, but it makes it so much easier if you have a plan from the very beginning. I would say it's not gone smoothly. I've not done it perfectly every time. Many of the disagreements that I've had with people have been over this particular very thorny issue of authorship. Really, really difficult, and about who's paying for what. And I think you just have to get it on the table. And one of the things you can do that is to write and share minutes and notes of meetings. So write to yourself an email when you're in meetings, write down an email to yourself and share it with people. And if somebody looks at you and you're the only person in the room, the junior person in the room, and it's all a load of people, and they look at you and say, you're doing the minutes, aren't you? You go, yes, I'll do the minutes, and I'm going to be in charge of writing all the action points and who does what. Are you okay with that? Because that has happened to me. You know, I've been the most junior person, the only woman in the room, and they've all gone and looked at me and said, you're going to write the minutes, aren't you? And I'm like, yeah, I can, and I will, but be warned, I will be assigning action points to people, and I'm not going to come out of that meeting with all the action points, because that's unfair, okay? I think it's really important to appreciate each other's view. I mean, why are you working together? You're working together because everybody has a different view, but get a central vision about it all. And work with colleagues outside your areas. I think it's important to appreciate that clinicians are very busy people. If they are writing an ethics application or they get a study set up, that in itself is a lot of time and energy. You might not realise that that's a lot of time and energy, but it is, and that's their contribution, and they should be rewarded for that. Similarly, somebody setting up and writing a piece of software, that's a lot of time and energy, their skill, and they should be rewarded for that. And you need to discuss how you actually work together to make sure that reward happens. Be polite. You know, just say thank you to people. Because actually, generally, most people are really friendly. UCL in particular is a really friendly place. You email people out of the blue to say, hi, I'm really interested, I saw your paper, and you'll get an answer back saying, great, can we set up a chat and work together? Say thank you and celebrate success. So that's really what I wanted to say. I think that those are my rules. I think collaboration is really important, and it's about having a vision which will keep you going when all the crazy things happen, companies go bust, grants are rejected, papers are turned down, and you think, oh, where am I going? But that's what keeps you going. Thanks.